Hey everybody, KC here. So I just finished having what I thought was a really interesting conversation with Stephanie Stuckey. And Stephanie Stuckey is the CEO of Stuckeys, which is known for its both its roadside stands and its candies and confections and pecan rolls and things like that. And it was a really interesting conversation. Now you would think Stephanie Stuckey, Stuckeys, oh, okay, she came up through the company. Uh, she's an heir to the Stuckey fortune or whatever it happens to be. This is not the case. Her grandfather started the business, sold the business at one point. Her father bought back the business, and she had no experience in retailing before she bought the business from her father and his business partners a couple of months before the pandemic. Really interesting story though, because in terms of understanding retail, in terms of understanding customers, about setting priorities, about the pitfalls of selling a company sometimes. Talked a lot about that. We also focused on two sessions that she's going to be doing at the National Grocers Association convention in Las Vegas at the end of February. And one is going to be about sort of how women have been so influential in the creation and development of the company over the decades. And the other one's going to be about the myth of the girl boss, which is what we talk about at the end. You're going to see a glitch at one point because her internet froze, so we had to kind of stop and then start again. I'll talk a little bit about it there. But I thought Stephanie Stuckey was really, really interesting with lots of lessons to teach all retailers, but especially independent retailers. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Stephanie Stuckey. Stephanie Stuckey, welcome to Morning Newsbeat. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
So you're going to be doing a couple of different sessions at the National Grocers Association Show in Las Vegas. And before we get to talk specifically about those sessions, give us a little history on Stuckeys, and because it's been kind of an interesting journey, as I understand it.
It's been a crazy road trip,
Yeah.
literally.
So your grandfather started the business?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll try to condense 85 years of history as quickly as I can, but my grandfather started Stuckeys as a roadside pecan stand in 1937 during the Great Depression. Very humble beginnings. He had to drop out of college to work on the family farm, and his side hustle was selling pecans at this little roadside stand, and it grew from there. At our peak in the 1960s, we had over 350 stores in 40 states. And you can see what the stores look like behind me. Stuckeys, as hopefully some of the attendees at the conference will remember and know our brand. We were really the original roadside retail chain. So we offered gas, clean restrooms, cold drinks, quick hot snacks, and then we're most famous for our pecan snacks and our candies. And we also sold a lot of really fun kitschy souvenirs like rubber alligators and shell statues and just all the fun things that you remember as a kid, at touristy places. So my grandfather sold the company in 1964. We had a series of corporate owners. We can get into that later, but frankly, the brand suffered terribly during those years. My father got the company back in 1985, ran it for 25 years. Then he and his business partners retired. The company was somewhat on autopilot with a skeleton crew and started to lose money, was frankly in debt when I was given the opportunity. I bought the company from my dad's former business partners and from my father 2 years ago. And we went from 6 figures in debt to now we are 6 figures in profit.
Wow.
So crazy journey.
It's interesting. I mean, you did that at a time when, you had no background in retail, right? You were a trial attorney and a politician. And yes. Two of the most loved professions in America, by the way.
Right?
No wonder you wanted to get into retail. And then you acquire the company just months before the pandemic kicks in and people stop traveling. That must have been a daunting challenge to you at that particular point.
Great timing. When you're in the thick of these difficult times, I don't think often you realize how tough things are because you're just focused on mushing through. And that really was my mindset. And also, it really wasn't as bad. I think those in the grocery business can relate. People still needed to travel, and they were traveling more by car than ever.
Mhm.
And they need to pull over and get gas. And when you're pulling over, you want to use the restroom. And while you're at it, you grab a snack. So we were still in operation. We certainly had to pivot and think about different ways to innovate and get our product sold. So our online sales increased by almost 500%.
Wow.
But people were still buying groceries during the pandemic, more so than ever, right? They were hunkering down, they were staying at home, they were rediscovering the joys of cooking and spending time with each other. So there were, before we hit the tape button, we talked about sort of the best of times, worst of times. There were certainly some positives in a weird way to the pandemic. And so we figured it out. It
Yeah.
makes you more resilient.
One of the things I think will be really relevant to the NGA audience, and frankly to the morning newsbeat audience, is the notion that the company was sold at to a company or companies that didn't necessarily share your priorities or didn't understand the business. And I think that's a point that a lot of retailers, small retailers especially, find themselves in today, where they're sitting there, they may be under-resourced in terms of trying to compete with larger competitors like, Amazon, Walmart, Kroger, pick
Yes.
your behemoth. And so they're trying to figure out, do I merge? Do I sell? What are the steps I take? Are there, and it certainly predates your time in the business, but do you have any sense of the kinds of questions that they should be asking themselves as they're kind of making those decisions?
Yes. Everything seems to be supersized these days, and there's this temptation to compete at that level, that we want to be like a Walmart or an Amazon because they have such tremendous business. But I think what's important to recognize is knowing the value of your brand and what your niche is. And if you want to play that game of being big volume, you have to have incredible capital. You probably do need to sell out to a large corporation, but you're going to lose a uniqueness and a specialness and a sense of belonging to a community of people in the process. So I think you have to decide what your brand is about. I have to say, one of my favorite books is Made in America by Sam Walton. And he actually discusses in that book ways that small town retailers can compete with Walmart. So I encourage you to read that book if you haven't. I've read it 3 times and I find something different every time. But he discusses how if you're a small hardware store, you can find what your specialty niche is. Maybe that's you sell barbecue equipment and you know more about barbecue equipment than anyone else, and you are the place to go. And so you create that sense of community and that loyal customer through your branding, through your customer service, through your product selection, through what your vision is, what your why is, as Simon Sinek says, if you follow him. And so if you want to sell out, and I certainly can understand that, and I understand why my grandfather did it, even though he sold a year before I was born, you're going to lose something in the process. And even if it seems like a good fit, when my grandfather sold to Pet Dairy Corporation, it was a good fit at the time. They owned Whitman Sampler. He was good friends with the CEO. He was head of the Stuckeys division of Pet when they sold. But then the CEO who had hired my grandfather, who had a good relationship with my grandfather, he died unexpectedly of a heart attack in his 40s. My grandfather was ousted by the new CEO. Then my grandfather died. And, stuff happens, right? I won't say the other word, but stuff happens.
Right. That word's been used here on Morning
It's
Newsbeat before.
out of your hands.
Yeah.
If you sell your company, it's out of your hands. Same if you go public.
Yeah.
And there's good and bad to both, but just recognize you're going to lose a lot of control.
And I imagine for your family, it had to be unusually personal because your name's on the door, right? I mean, it's not like, right? It's out there. But it's interesting. One of the things I write a lot about on Morning Newsbeat is that if you want to compete with Amazon or Walmart, whoever, do the things that they can't do or won't do, as opposed to things that they are doing.
Exactly.
And you've pivoted. You were talking about having over 400 stores. Was it how many stores and how many states you had at the
We had
peak?
368 stores in 40 states at our peak and 4,000 billboards.
Yeah. And how many stores do you have? I mean, you've pivoted in the sense you have much fewer stores now.
Oh my
They're all
gosh.
they're all franchisees, right?
Well, actually licensed. I don't
License.
want to get too much
Okay.
in the legalities of it, but
Okay.
we're licensing. So we don't have a whole lot of control over the stores.
Right. But you've also pivoted, so you actually are now in the manufacturing business,
That's
which
right.
allows you to control the product to a greater degree.
Yes, we own a pecan shelling plant and a candy plant, and we have a distribution facility. So we are in the distribution business and we're in the pecan and the candy business now. I mean, we've always been in that business, but we were outsourcing our product before I came back in the company. My grandfather made his own candy and shelled his own pecan. So we're really getting back to our roots, which is exciting.
And that's a great metaphor for what grocers need to do, as opposed, because I always argue that 85 to 90% of what's in most supermarkets is the same stuff that everybody else is selling. And the more you can sell stuff that is unique to you, the easier it is, or the more able you are to differentiate yourself in whatever the marketplace
Right?
needs to be.
Yeah, it's about differentiating. What's your secret sauce? And the other thing is to really hunker down on what's working.
Right.
So if what makes you different is that you sell barbecue supplies, but nobody's really buying that, so you might need to rethink it. And so I had to look at what's a healthy business inside of our failing business. And the healthy business for us was we were making really good money from the sale of our pecan log rolls. It's amazing. We sell hundreds of thousands of pecan log rolls every year. And I just thought we need to double and triple down. I'm going to use a gambling analogy since we're headed to Vegas, right? I need to double down on pecan log rolls. And how do you do that? You make the product yourself and you expand where you sell your product. So we're in grocery stores now. We're expanding our channels. We're in more C stores. We're in more retail outlets. That's how we're growing the brand.
And did I read someplace that you'd like to get into company-owned stores at some point?
I would love that, but it's all in time, right?
Right.
It's all sequencing and when we can do it. So it's hard sometimes because I want to do everything at once. But if you really want to grow strategically in a way that makes sense, you have to pace yourself. So that's going to be a little bit further down the road.
So let's talk about the two subjects that you're going to be talking about at NGA. The first one you're doing is you're going to talk about the company and how women were always the secret ingredient in its success. Yes. Beyond You is the obvious example now. Tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about.
So I'm going to tell you one of my favorite stories about the founding of Stuckeys. How we got in the candy business is my grandfather was sitting at that roadside stand one day, and imagine it was very hot. I kind of recreate in my mind the details of that day, knowing how hot and miserable it is in Dodge County, Georgia in July. And he was waiting for cars to drive by and trying to think of ways he could get more people to stop. And he came up with an idea, and he was one of those people. He had an idea, he acted on it immediately, and he ran the mile to our home, or his home back then, interrupted my grandmother's bridge game. Her name was Ethel. And he said, Ethel, we need to make candy. People will buy candy if we can get the pecans and make candy. And my grandmother's like, great idea. Except I don't know how to make candy. So she and her bridge club partners, who happened to also mostly be her sisters, they went in the kitchen and they figured out how to make pralines and divinity and fudge and our now famous pecan log rolls. All of these were based on family recipes and Southern confections that many people knew. And that bridge club became the Candy Club. So those women really should be credited with helping to found the company. And then throughout the company's history, my grandmother remained very active, even though she never had a formal vice president of whatever role. She was my grandfather's trusted advisor. And then during World War II, when we expanded into manufacturing and we were supplying candy for the troops, who worked those candy plant, the candy plant, it was women. Wow. And so, I love to say we weren't just making candy, we were empowering families. We were creating livelihood for women who were home during the war, during economic hard times, and giving them jobs and giving them self-sufficiency and giving them skills. And my grandfather's archives are filled with letters from these women just thanking him for their lives and their careers working for Stuckey's. It's really heartwarming.
I love the idea that this bridge club didn't know how to make candy, and it's not like they could just Google the recipe, right? It was a little bit more complicated then. By the way, you mentioned your grandfather and the pecan stand. I read somewhere, correct me if I got this wrong, but that when he was doing store placement, he liked to be on the northbound side of the highway as opposed to the southbound, because he figured as a essentially southern confection, people would be more likely to stop when they're returning home to the north than when they were going south. Is that the story?
Yeah, and he didn't have an MBA. Like I said, he had to drop out of college to go work the family farm. And so I think so much of business is just understanding the customer and putting yourself in their position. So he figured out, if you're going on vacation, and most of our customers were coming from the north, driving to Florida, going on vacation, then driving back home. When you're coming back home from vacation is when you're more likely to spend your money, right? Because when you're going to your destination, you're saving up all your money. So you have sufficient budget for the hotel and the restaurants and all of that. And then dad's always like, buy the souvenirs at the end when we know that we can. And then you don't mind the car being loaded up with stuff because you're going home. You know, you're not going to have to deal with all that extra stuff in your car. So he really thought through that. And he's like, okay, my stores are going to be on the north, on the right side, because it's easier to pull over to the right side than going across the highway. And so he tried to be on a hill.
That's wild.
He really thought through all of that.
So your other session, I'm intrigued with. It's called The Myth of the Girl Boss. So maybe one of the few places where the word girl can be used without it's from women and not be seemed demeaning, I guess.
Right. I guess if you're a woman, maybe you can get away with using it. Maybe not.
So
I hope no one's offended.
And give me the Reader's Digest version. What is the myth of the girl boss?
Well, I just made a post. I did a post one day on LinkedIn and it really took off. I need to check the engagement, but it had tens of thousands of likes and over 500,000 views last time I checked. So it really took off. And so I thought that might be a good topic. Clearly there's interest in this idea. And the post there's a story behind the post. I had a really frustrating hard day where I was in blue jeans and a grubby t-shirt and I was counting inventory at our warehouse. I was really rolling up my sleeves and being part of the team because all hands on deck if you own a small business. And I was just scrolling through my LinkedIn feed and seeing all these super polished career women with their spiked heels and their perfectly done hair and their makeup flawless and all this. And everything just seemed so effortless. And that just wasn't that interesting to me. And I thought I would much rather hear about some of the nitty gritty hard stuff that we have to do to be successful in business. And I guarantee you those beautiful, flawless, picture perfect women have days like the day I had at that time. And I think we should talk about those hard days more so, frankly, than the high five moments when you're cutting a ribbon at a new facility or when you get a strong financial earnings report. What really makes a company is how you deal with those tough times. That's when we figure it out, how to be profitable, how to sell product, how to get more market share. It's those tough days. And so I think that the myth of the girl boss is it's okay to have these hard days. It's okay to wear a t-shirt and blue jeans and count inventory. And not only is it okay, we should celebrate that more so than some of these other moments, because those are the moments that define us and make us better business people.
Do you think the high five moments, the polish, the part of the reason those are celebrated more is especially by women, is that there are different or higher expectations for women than there would be for men, that they are expected, it's the old, Ginger Rogers had to be a better dancer than Fred Astaire because she had to do it backwards and in heels. And so are there different / unfair expectations for women in leadership positions?
Absolutely. I think women are judged more by their looks, by how they dress, certainly as they age. I'm now 50. I've just passed my mid 50 mark. Yikes. So there are.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, Christmas Day was my birthday. So me and I get to celebrate with the rest of the world, really. But I think that there are more pressures on women. I think that we are.
Okay, Stephanie, I lost you for a second because you froze. So you repositioned yourself. So the question I wanted to ask was, do you believe that there are different and greater expectations for women leaders than there are for men?
Absolutely. And welcome now to my living room. Yes, I do. And I think women are still trying to navigate that dynamic. And that's part of what the second session is going to be more literally let your hair down, feel comfortable, hopefully be in a bit of a safe space. I know it's a smaller breakout session where we can have more of a conversation, I hope, than just me standing up there and giving a talk. And I would like to delve into that. I think women do have expectations, some of it put on by our male colleagues, but some of it is really internal. I think sometimes we're hardest on our own selves and have expectations that we can do it all. I think what I'd like to see as we move forward is more women are growing in the workforce and leadership positions and as CEOs, that we start embracing what makes us special and different. Just like if you're, we were discussing earlier how you compete with the Amazons of the world is you figure out what makes you unique and special. So, how can we turn that being female into a superpower? What are our advantages?
So let's suppose the audience that you have for the breakout session on the myth of the girl boss is half men and half women. So what would be the message that you would want to give the men in that audience?
I think to acknowledge that there are differences in a way that should be celebrated. And I think too often we really like our comfort zones in business. And, the statistics all play that out. When you start elevating more women, when you start elevating more minorities in positions of power, then the hiring and the board memberships and everything else starts to reflect more of that diversity. And so it's just learning to get out of the comfort zone of being around people that are somewhat just like you, not just in appearance, but also in thinking, in views, in culture, because you want to be able to reflect what your customer base is. And customers want to support companies that look like them.
Right.
And who does most of the shopping in America at grocery stores? It's women.
Right.
So I think men could definitely benefit from this discussion and are absolutely 100% welcome. And just come in with an open mind and be willing to share.
Do you think is it a stereotype that, I mean, I think I know the answer to the question, but is it a stereotype and is it a bad stereotype that women are as leaders, as bosses, they're more nurturing, they're more understanding, they're more intuitive, they tend to be less dogmatic? Are those things, well, are they stereotypes, and are they stereotypes that are based in truth, and are those all good things to be as a boss?
Well, what do you think?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, I mean, that would be my argument, because it was but I think that's a hard, I mean, there's a commercial on TV right now where there's a man and a woman sitting behind a desk. I don't know if you've seen it. And it's actually a car commercial for Lexus. And if I can find it, I'll actually post it below this. And it's fascinating. The guy is there saying, well, if you want to be a leader, you got to do this, this, this. And he's got to dress for success. You're going to be hard charging. You got to do this. And then the woman stands up and she says, well, thank you for coming in. We'll be in touch. And she's a young woman who looks not unconventional, but if you had to fit, based on tradition, you'd think he was the boss, but that was not the case. And clearly he talked himself out of a job offer. And I think that is, I mean, to me, that is very reflective of where we are today.
Yeah, I got to see that commercial. I've not seen it. So absolutely.
I will send you the link. So, okay, so
I agree with you. I think it is accurate. And I think that's like I said before, it's one of our superpowers. And it's not just more nurturing. I think it's more consensus based, more collaborative, more willing to work with others. And I think there's some creativity there that really should be championed, that we need to see more in leadership.
Yeah.
It really enhances the overall work environment when you are more inclusive.
So let me ask you one last question about this then, which is that, so I have a 27-year-old daughter. I also teach at Portland State University, where I have a lot of young students who are in their, early to mid 20s. Most of them are women. So what would you tell them about becoming both good managers and great leaders? What advice would you give them?
First of all,
because I don't think that's the same thing. I think managing and leading are two entirely different skills.
Yeah, you're right. First of all, I'd say I think I probably have a lot to learn from them as well. I think one of the most important character traits of a leader is your ability to listen, to really understand where people are coming from and get their insights, especially people who are at different levels of the company. I get so many insights just talking to people who are pickers in our warehouse. They have great understanding of the inner workings of the company, and you can learn from everyone. So I think part of it is making sure that you're a really good listener. So I'd love to hear what your daughter has to say. What makes people good leaders? I would say one of the most important traits is to understand what your strengths are and really hunker down on what you're good at, and then surround yourself with people who complement their skills and understand that you cannot do it all. As far as management, I think a lot of management is interacting with people, and just recognize that that's going to be a big part of your job. I was talking to a manager the other day. He was sort of bemoaning the fact that about 90% of their job right now is doing HR. And I thought, yeah, that is every day what you're doing if you're in management, is you're dealing with people, that dynamic between different people and how they interact. That's the secret sauce to having a successful company.
It's so interesting you say that. There was a story that I picked up on Morning Newsbeat the other day, and it was along the same lines, that that suddenly that people who are running companies or running divisions of companies or stores, they suddenly had to pay so much more attention to HR stuff. They had to pay more attention to employees and be concerned about their concerns and listen to their priorities and have a sense of that. And my first reaction was, gee, what a shame it took a pandemic to get people to the point where they would think about, if you're actually leading people, you got to pay attention to your people.
Yeah. Right. But I think crisis, we so often look at crisis as times of really bad times, but there's also something really positive about a crisis, that it forces you to really look at some of the underlying stresses that have to be addressed. A crisis is like a shock to a system. And if you don't have the underlying foundation in place for a good, solid company, you're not going to really weather that crisis well. So crises force us to make sure that we understand what the underlying vulnerabilities are with our company, with the entire infrastructure. You think about all the supply chain issues. I mean, that revealed this underlying stress in our country, which is why I think it's so important that we're manufacturing. I think getting Americans back to manufacturing and making stuff ourselves. I know I'm getting a little off a tangent, but that's how we're going to move this country forward, is the more we can source product locally, we can make stuff ourselves and not have to ship across the world. I think we're going to be able to weather these supply chain issues so much better.
I think the use of the word stress is really important. I think it's a great metaphor. When we as human beings get stress tests, what are they telling us? Whether we're in shape to be able to endure. Well, if businesses get stress tests, that tells that, which is what that's what the pandemic has been. That is now telling companies whether or not they're able to endure or not. And if you can't, then you got to address whatever those issues are.
Exactly.
So Anyway, listen, Stephanie, I really appreciate your time. I'm sorry we got frozen up there, but I look forward to seeing you at the National Grocers Association convention in Las Vegas at the end of February. I think your sessions sound terrific. I'm looking forward to attending. So take care. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. It's been a pleasure.